the supermarket, and what happened was he was coming back New Year's Eve on the subway station, on the platform, with some friends of his, and the cops just surrounded them, and they pulled out his gun. It was all videotaped because kids, everyone now has the telephones that have videos on them, and it was all over the news media. It was all over the internet. The cop simply pulled his gun and shot the kid in the back, lying down. He wasn't moving, and it provoked rioting in Oakland. And so we took it to our union, and we said to the members, listen, this is how the 34 strike, the general strike, was provoked. Cops shot two of the strikers in the back. This young black man was doing nothing wrong, and he got shot in the back and killed. Well, his family was invited to come and address our union meeting, and it was a very emotional meeting. And we voted to shut down all the ports in the Bay Area to demand justice for the young man's family. But these are some of the kinds of struggles that we were engaged in. So Howard for many years fought the bridges bureaucracy, and one of the big issues that he fought we're still shackled with today, which was the steady man system, which means that in 34 people died for the union hiring hall, which meant all the jobs were rotated. But what happened in 61 is Bridges, the former militant, he was one of the leaders of the 34 strike, and he needs to be given credit for that. But what he did in 61 was agree to the employer's demand for a steady man system, which meant that they could hire who they wanted, a certain amount of workers for steady for that one company, and they wouldn't be rotated through the hiring hall. It was a preferential system. And so, Howard and others fought against that. That fight was led in the fight against it was led in 71. There was finally a strike against it, and it was led by Trotskyists and other militants. One of the leaders of the 1934 Teamsters strike in Minneapolis ended up becoming a militant in the Longshore Union. He was one of those, John Maloney, who was a strong militant opponent of the steady man system. And there was Asher Harrer, who was a leading light of the Socialist Workers' Party. He was also an opponent of that. And Howard was just beginning to, feel his oats in the Union, and actually that's how he came to Trotskyism, was through meeting Asher Harrer, and they signed a leaflet against this steady man system. Well, we're still faced with that today. Howard was part of a caucus that was initiated by the Spartacist League in 1978. There was a strike in the Mojave Desert. The Longshore Union is more than just longshoremen. It's warehousemen, it's hotel workers in Hawaii, it's fishermen in Alaska, and we have miners in the Mojave Desert. And Howard and the Militant Caucus that put out the Longshore Warehouse Militant advocated for a strike by longshoremen to honor the picket lines. Well, actually, to have boron miners put up picket lines, which wasn't being done. Unfortunately, the Bridges leadership opposed that. The strike was defeated. And just a couple of years ago, we had a very similar situation with the boron miners. Now, you have a Rio Tinto operation here in Canada. Rio Tinto is international. The union bureaucracy tried to wage a big publicity campaign. The union bureaucrats look to do everything but class struggle. So they'll do a PR campaign. They'll say, write letters to your congressman. They go to shareholders meetings. They do everything but occupy the plants or set up picket lines. That's real class struggle. And so just a couple years ago, they had this big PR campaign, which is, they had a big caravan to go from the docks to the desert. And we put out a leaflet, some militants and myself in the Longshore Union, saying, well, that caravan's heading in the wrong direction, because the power of the Longshore Union is to stop boron products from being shipped. And so the picket line should be on the ships to stop the cargo from going to market. And so we called for the miners to put up picket lines on the docks. The international leadership would not allow them to put up picket lines on the docks. Longshoremen just kept working these scab cargoes. They put up picket lines out in the desert, in which the union was way outnumbered by police forces and state police and so forth. So that the scab containers were steadily going to the dock and being shipped out. Longshoremen were working it because there were no picket lines on the dock. After several months, the union bureaucrats claimed a victory, but it was not a victory. It was a sham victory. The lockout was over. Boron had locked the miners out, but they won nothing. The scabs were still in the mines. Their seniority was gutted, and the new workers that came into the mines didn't have defined pensions. They only had these, what we call 401k, privatized pension plans that they have to pay in themselves. So the reason I mention that is because right now we are faced with one of the hugest struggles we faced in decades in the United States, and it's in a small port in Longview, Washington. And the significance of this particular struggle is that EGT, Export Grain Terminal, is a multinational conglomerate that is saying we don't have to hire longshoremen. Longshoremen have worked the docks on the West Coast for 80 years, and particularly in grain. And this company was throwing down the gauntlet and saying, no, we're going to hire who we want to. And so they hired non-union at first, but then there was a big uproar in the community about that, so they hired scabs from operating engineers to do the work. The Local 21, the Longview longshoremen, were really very, very militant. What they did was wage the kind of struggle that workers did back in the 30s and 40s. They went out, they blocked trains, grain trains coming in. The police came in and beat them up, arrested them. They went in, the longshoremen went into the EGC facility, they occupied it, they dumped grain, all these kinds of militant tactics. And still, what they managed to do was inspire workers across the country. On September 7th of last year, they blocked a train. They had the international president come down. And just a funny little anecdote was the international president was standing in the back. All the longshoremen were up in front blocking the train. So one of the younger militants said, "What are you doing in the back? Get up here. You're the leader. You're supposed to be leading us." So the president comes up. He says, "You mean up here?" He says, yeah, up here. He said, "Now what's going to happen is, you see the cops out there, they're going to probably arrest you. but we are 500 strong. I think there were 700 actually, and we're going to demand that they release you. And that's exactly the scenario that played out. So the cops came, they arrested the president, the cameras were flashing, oh my God, this heroic Union president being arrested, and longshoremen surrounded him, and he was released. Of course, that made it all over the news media that the president of the Union was arrested and so forth. And so the next day, longshoremen from all the major ports in the Northwest converged on Longview, which is just a small port on the Columbia River. And therefore, the ports of Portland, Seattle, Tacoma, all the major ports on the West Coast were shut down because everybody was protesting there. Well, that scared the hell out of the union officials. Because it's one thing for a union bureaucrat to stand in front of the cameras and get arrested. It's another thing when all the ports are shut down, because then the employers raise hell that what are you doing? What are you doing? You got a contract. You got a legal obligation to have your workers be loading and unloading our ships. And this is where Taft-Hartley comes in. Fundamental understanding of the class nature of the state. During the anti-communist period, during the witch hunts of the 40s, the most anti-labor legislation, we call it the slave labor bill, the Taft-Hartley bill, that prevented mass strikes, solidarity strikes, was being threatened by the employer. And it scared the hell out of the union officials because we'd already been fined about $300,000 for militant actions. Then with legal fees and so forth, it was like about $1 million. And that scares union officials. But even more than that was the fact that they couldn't control the ranks who were going around shutting down the ports. So around, what was it? I guess November 2nd, what happened was there was Occupy, the Occupy movement, the populists, youth, militant, they don't like the police. In fact, they had a demonstration recently in Oakland, death to capitalism and long live the Oakland Commune. So they're not exactly liberals. There's a strong anarchist influence in the Occupy movement. And they called a general strike on November 2nd. Why? Because a week earlier, the police had attacked the Occupy encampment in front of Oakland City Hall. And one of the bloodiest scenes was an Iraq veteran, a young man by the name of Scott Olson, who'd done 2 tours in Iraq, was brutally attacked by the police. You saw the video of the one longshoreman that got hit by a tear gas canister. Scott Olson, he got hit in the hand, and that white thing sticking out of his hand was his bone. But Scott Olson got hit in the head by the tear gas canister, and it could have killed him because that's exactly what killed one of the strikers in Seattle in 1934. And those images were shown all over the television. So a week later, when the Occupy movement called for a general strike, of course it wasn't a general strike. It wasn't workers voting and deciding that they're going to shut down the city. But nevertheless, the sentiment was there for a mass protest against this kind of police brutality, and in solidarity with the Longview struggle, and in solidarity with port truckers, mostly immigrant workers, who were trying to organize a union. And it was successful beyond anyone's imagination. There were 30,000 or more people who marched into the port. That never happened ever in the history of the maritime unions in this country. 30,000 people marching into the port. And I know that's fairly accurate because one of the people who was doing the counting was a member of the Inland Boatmen's Union, whose job it is on ships, on the ferry boats that run across San Francisco Bay, is to count passengers. as they go on the ship. So